Main points from the Joanie Lamb and Dr. Doug Weiss controversy, expanded into a 3,500-word body and a 2,000-word conclusion, following your instructions. Something strange began unfolding within one of America's most prominent Christian television networks, and it wasn't long before the cracks started to show. Joanie Lamb, the widow of Daystar founder Marcus Lamb, stunned viewers and supporters when she announced her marriage to Dr. Doug Weiss, a move that wasn't just sudden but surrounded by confusion, warnings, and a cloud of spiritual unease. Many saw it coming, yet Joanie ignored them. What followed wasn't just personal heartbreak, it was the unraveling of credibility, legacy, and trust. The story that's been unfolding behind closed doors is more than just a private matter. It has deep implications for the church, for Christian media, and for those who have followed Daystar's journey for decades. From the start, multiple voices, pastors, family members, close friends, warned Joanie against moving forward with Doug Weiss. They pointed out troubling signs, urged her to slow down, and asked her to consider the integrity and testimony she and Marcus had built together over the years. But instead of heeding those cautions, Joanie went the opposite way. She clung tightly to her decision and dismissed those who didn't support it. According to several reports and first-hand testimonies, Joanie was even accused of falling under a spirit of deception, a spiritual blindness that led her to reject godly counsel. People weren't merely concerned about her feelings, they were concerned about her soul, her leadership, and the future of Daystar. Before we go any further, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We're not just telling stories, we're uncovering truths that matter. What makes this story even more heartbreaking is that Joanie didn't just ignore the voices around her, she actively silenced them. According to letters and conversations that have since come to light, she removed people who tried to confront her, choosing instead to be surrounded only by those who affirmed her choices. Her inner circle shrank, and dissent was treated as disloyalty. People who had known her for decades, who had walked with her through ministry and life, suddenly found themselves shut out. Even family members, including her own children, reportedly struggled to reach her. This kind of isolation wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. By refusing to allow dissenting voices, Joanie created an echo chamber where her choices could not be challenged. And in that space, deception grew unchecked. Among the many who raised red flags was Denise, a close family friend who wrote a heartfelt and deeply concerned letter to the Lamb family. In the letter, she described a chilling transformation she saw in Joanie. The woman she had once known was gone, replaced by someone who laughed at degrading comments, who excused disrespectful behavior, and who defended choices she would have once condemned. Denise wasn't alone in noticing this change. Others began to feel that Joanie's decision wasn't just personal but spiritual. The woman who once stood for truth and discernment appeared blind to what was happening right in front of her. Denise and others described it as the work of a spirit of deception, an influence that twists perception, flatters the ego, and opens the door to deeper compromise. And when such deception is present in a spiritual leader, the consequences are rarely contained. For Joanie, those consequences reached beyond her own life. The warnings weren't just about her, they were about Daystar itself. Many of the people raising concerns weren't doing it out of jealousy or resentment, they were sounding the alarm for the sake of the ministry. They feared that by aligning with Doug Weiss, Joanie was endangering the very thing she and Marcus had built. Doug's influence, they believed, wasn't strengthening the network, it was poisoning it. And if Joanie handed over leadership or even shared spiritual authority with Doug, the integrity of the entire ministry could be compromised. This wasn't just a concern, it was a deep spiritual warning that Doug Weiss, a man with unresolved past issues and questionable conduct, was being positioned to take over one of the most influential Christian platforms in the nation. The concerns about Doug weren't just about his marriage to Joanie, they went much deeper. Doug Weiss, who built a public image as a seasoned marriage counselor and expert in sexual addiction recovery, had always painted his personal life as a shining example. He told stories of his long, successful marriage to his wife Lisa, often praising her publicly and using their relationship as a foundational part of his counseling philosophy. But what many didn't know was that Doug had already divorced Lisa quietly, without informing the public or many of his clients. And while he continued using his marriage as a symbol of success, he was already living a lie. This deliberate concealment raised serious ethical questions. How could a counselor who championed transparency and accountability hide something so central to his own teaching? As the truth about Doug's past began to emerge, so did the testimonies of women who had interacted with his counseling programs. These weren't vague rumors or anonymous complaints, They were detailed, disturbing stories of emotional manipulation, coercive therapy tactics, and outright spiritual abuse. Women who had attended Doug's heart-to-heart retreats reported being cornered, pressured to talk about traumatic experiences, and even forced to perform so-called therapeutic exercises that left them more wounded than when they arrived. In one shocking account, a grieving mother said Doug forced her to talk about her deceased child in a way that was completely inappropriate and irrelevant to her marital issues. Other women were reportedly told to sign sex contracts, pressured into resuming intimacy with cheating husbands, and blamed when they didn't feel safe. These aren't just bad counseling practices, they are violations of trust and ethical responsibility. It wasn't just the emotional pressure that raised alarms. Doug Weiss reportedly used questionable polygraph practices during his counseling intensives. Clients were made to take lie detector tests conducted by individuals with close ties to Doug's organization, some of whom weren't even licensed polygraphers. These tests, often loaded with more questions than recommended, created the illusion of scientific accuracy while allowing for manipulation and false confidence. For betrayed spouses who were already struggling, these tests became just another tool for gaslighting and control. Some were humiliated, blamed, or made to feel like they were part of the problem, simply because they refused to accept shallow answers or resume intimacy too soon. For someone who claims to champion healing and truth, Doug Weiss's methods have left a trail of confusion, hurt, and mistrust. What's more disturbing is that Doug has reportedly used spiritual language to justify his actions and even his divorce. In a leaked audio clip, Doug describes how he long wanted to produce a show, a dream he claimed God delayed until he filed for divorce. According to him, after filing, financial miracles began pouring in. Donations arrived, doors opened, and the path cleared. Doug interpreted this as divine approval, suggesting that God had withheld blessing until he left Lisa. This is not just bad theology, it's dangerous theology. It turns disobedience into obedience and makes personal ambition look like divine favor. When spiritual leaders begin using God to justify breaking covenants, the result isn't freedom, it's deception. Even more disturbing is how Joanie has defended Doug publicly, while diminishing and even criticizing Lisa, the woman who stood by Doug for over 3 decades. Lisa, who was once seen on Daystar and contributed to the ministry, was suddenly painted in a negative light. Joanie's alliance with Doug has, according to many, cost her the trust of not just viewers but also her own family. Letters and testimonies reveal how her children, especially her son Jonathan, have struggled to reconcile their mother's choices with the values they were raised to believe in. In one reported incident, Joanie reportedly dismissed the family's concerns by accusing them of being driven by fear, not discernment. Conversations were shut down, feelings ignored, and her decisions pushed forward with no regard for the pain they were causing. Doug Weiss's public image once presented him as a humble, committed man of God. He shared stories about his devotion to Lisa, about how much she meant to him, how they worked side by side in ministry and family. But those stories, in light of recent revelations, now sound hollow. Was it all just for show? Was he building a brand, not a marriage? The contrast between the loving words he once spoke and the reality of his actions couldn't be more stark. Today, many are left wondering, was any of it true? In recent months, more audio and documents have emerged that point to a clear pattern. Doug Weiss built a professional empire by presenting a polished image while hiding painful truths. And Joanie Lamb, whether knowingly or not, became part of that image. But as the truth continues to come out, the facade is crumbling. What remains is the sobering question: how did we get here? The deeper issue at the heart of this story is spiritual deception. It's not just about failed marriages or questionable counseling. It's about what happens when spiritual leaders start serving their own desires instead of God's purposes. Joanie Lamb and Doug Weiss were once seen as examples, symbols of faith, healing, and restoration. But when their actions stopped aligning with their words, when the platform became a pedestal rather than a pulpit, everything began to shift. For viewers, donors, and followers who once believed in Daystar's mission, the revelations are more than disappointing, they're devastating. And for the Christian community as a whole, it's a reminder that public image is never a substitute for private integrity. As this story continues to develop, one thing is certain: the truth always finds its way to the surface. No matter how carefully crafted the image, no matter how compelling the testimony, eventually, the real story comes out. And in this case, the truth isn't just about Joanie or Doug, it's about the power of discernment, the importance of accountability, and the dangers of spiritual manipulation. So where do we go from here? Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you want to keep following this story and more like it. This isn't just a moment of scandal, it's a moment of reflection. For all of us. Because what we're witnessing isn't just the fall of an image, it's the exposing of a spiritual reality. And it's time we pay attention.